The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. And good morning. Welcome to The Old School, a podcast about primarily the American education system, its quirks, its qualities, its traits, its problems, solutions, insofar as we know the solutions. But since we're both retired, and since we now have the luxury of not having education occupy our every moment, we do indulge in other things, as we will today. And with me in that endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Morning, sir.
Good morning, Herr Miller. Good to see you this morning. And I don't feel retired because I'm working about 60 hours per week, but I'm no longer in front of students or no longer riding the merry-go-round, as the great John Lennon once said.
Listen, you choose to do this. You have done this to yourself. You have only yourself to blame.
You're talking about my career path?
I'm talking about your current level, your current workload.
Oh, not really. Unless you like the concept of poverty.
I've been there before. It's so fine. It's fine.
I'd love to spout off. Is that what you say? On
I
the
don't know what you're saying right now.
on the teacher retirement system and what passes as a retirement after working, 25 odd years. But you know what I mean, because you see the checks, that you couldn't support much of you could live yourself in maybe a single wide on a plot of land on that check.
I like to think of it that if Jen divorced me now,
Yeah,
and took custody of the kid,
yeah,
not that I'm wishing for that.
no,
I have thought of exit plans just because I think it's smart to have an exit plan. So, but I think I could perhaps live on my own with my pension,
yeah.
uh, by itself.
Oh, I think so.
Maybe in Idaho.
I think we both go to Idaho and get a little place of land there and just live off the grid. That could happen.
Maybe grow some orchids and orchards, and then we can sell like fruit pies off the side of the street.
Yes, I will be the first to buy from you here, Miller. We'll be buying them from each other because I don't think anyone else buys.
I think I could make a pie. I think I could bake pies for a living. Maybe, I don't know. What the hell?
I was thinking being a cheesemaker.
Well, blessed are the cheesemakers.
Yeah, artisanal cheese, right?
Artisanal cheese?
I think so.
All right.
Yeah, meaning there's some art to it. You're not just buying it at the store.
Just willy-nilly making cheese.
Oh, it's the good stuff.
Well,
Well,
today we pick up
Yeah.
with a infrequent yet highly heralded series on the states. We started with Kansas. We then did Washington, D.C. And now, as part of a two-part mini series, but not consecutive, we're going to do my home state. And then I think the next state we do will be your home state of Oregon.
Boy.
And so I know we may have to do a double episode for Oregon. There's so much stuff there to dissect.
So
maybe we can do Oregon and like Puerto Rico together, since there's not as much.
You're insulting my state of choice. Baltimore and Maryland are kind of polarizing because people think of Maryland and Baltimore and they think of The Wire.
And this is, and for no other reason. First of all, I think it's only you that does this.
No.
But second of all, I think too many people have a bad rap about. I think Baltimore has a bad rap. I think Maryland has a bad rap, whatever. Whatever thing they have is bad. And I think that it's up to me and my fellow Marylanders and Baltimoreans to set the record straight.
Marylanders? Is that what you're called?
Marylanders. Not Marylanders. It sounds like a It sounds
But
like a
where's the
soap
Y? You
company.
dropped the
It sounds
Y.
like a soap company, Mary Landers.
Well, you dropped the Y. You'd have a Y. You say Marylanders.
Marylanders, yeah.
Okay. I'm really taking the conversation down to its lowest level. Yeah.
No, but it's a wonderful state, and I find myself often, and maybe it's just my imagination, but I often feel that I have to kind of defend it, that I have to explain it, that I have to justify it, that I have to say, oh, by the way, there's some nice parts to it. And so consider this the ultimate, not justification, but shall we say explanation of to the greatness of the state of Maryland, the great state of Maryland.
Okay. Well, I know very little about it except for you claim to hail from there. That's about it.
I don't claim I am from Maryland.
You were born there. You were
I
born.
wasn't born there, but I was raised there.
You get,
And so I can claim it just as much as I can claim Texas, but
just like your pro football team. You've never been to Florida or Tampa Bay.
I have been to both, by the way,
You've been to Tampa.
only recently, but still,
Okay, so it's already. Uh, I'm incredulous when you bring up that you're from Baltimore when you have not been born there. You were never
you're
born there.
you're ridiculous. Anyway, so while my good friend Dr. Stephen Bourgeois goes through what I can only describe as some sort of episode, I'm going to sit here and tell you a little bit about. I'm going to start with kind of like a brief history of Maryland, and then we will use our witty repertoire to discuss the other aspects of the state.
Okay.
But for some people, you might think that moving to the colonies to escape religious persecution is the sole purview of the Puritans. And while that is, they are certainly an example of that, there's actually four groups who moved to the colonies to escape religious persecution. The aforementioned Puritans, who settled in what became Massachusetts. There were the Quakers, who were following William Penn to Pennsylvania when he was able to get a charter for this colony of Pennsylvania, the territory of Pennsylvania. Later on, a second group will go to Pennsylvania known as the Amish. They too were being persecuted back in the old world. But in 1634, the Calvert family was able to get and secure a piece of territory along the eastern seaboard of the colonies. Well, really, the colonies were all the eastern seaboard, but this territory was going to be unique because once it is established, it will be the only place within the British Empire where Catholicism can be openly worshiped and practiced. And so when you think about there's various things that Maryland is known for historically. One is that it has a very deep and rich African American history to it, mainly because Maryland was kind of the gateway into free territory. Once slavery becomes the kind of the law of the land. Additionally, though, Catholicism is a big part of it. And the state of Maryland, I've heard stories about the state of Maryland wanting to create kind of like a Freedom Road type of thing that you see in Boston. They want to do something where people can walk and discover both African American history, but there's also talk about doing something that kind of connects the Catholicism and the history of Catholicism in Maryland. And when we say Catholicism in Maryland, we're talking about Catholicism in the United States because this is where it started. This is where it was born out of. The only other place that has a long Catholic history that's now a part of the United States is New Mexico. But as far as the initial 13 colonies, Maryland was at the center of it.
No fooling.
No
I,
fooling.
I had no idea. Well,
So that's why, you if you look at like first in the United States, the first cardinal was from Baltimore. The first person ever um, uh, beatified as a saint was from Maryland, Elizabeth Ann Seton. So you have all these good Catholic markers that kind of tell the history of Catholicism in the United States, and it starts in Maryland.
we have a school.
Isn't that amazing?
don't I mean in our near where we live called Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton.
Elizabeth Ann Seton, yeah, it's the Catholic Church and that's the yeah, I mean that's the local Catholic church. There's also a school there. It's called Elizabeth Ann Seton. It's quite popular.
So as
She
you
was the
grew up,
first American saint.
so when you grew up, you knew Elizabeth. She was from the neighborhood.
I didn't know her personally. Heard stories about her, of course. We
Okay,
all
what I
did.
mean, what
Uh,
time are we talking about? Was this, during the early years? How when did she emerge?
so Elizabeth Ann Seton, I believe, emerged in the 1700s. I'm not terribly um, positive about that. I don't know when she lived. I just know that she hailed from the great state, perhaps at the time the great colony of Maryland. And so when Maryland is established, one of the first towns that they establish is St. Mary's. So St. Mary's is actually not really a town anymore. It's kind of more of a settlement. It's on the far southern tip of Maryland. Um, and eventually, as they kind of secured their territory and kind of figured out where the actual colony was, originally the northern line of latitude included the city of Philadelphia, which was much to the surprise of Pennsylvanians. And so what they ended up doing in the 1600s is they tasked two guys, one by the name of Mason, one by the name of Dixon, to kind of establish the actual lay of the land of where Maryland was. So in the 1600s, you have the establishment of the colony, you have the establishment of the first settlements, which would include St. Mary's, later includes the city of Baltimore. And then later on in the 1700s, actually 1767, right after Baltimore is founded in the early 1720s, they basically established this line. And you can go into Maryland today. You can go into the forest that kind of follow where that trail was because there is markers that date back to the 1700s that highlight the original Mason-Dixon line. Now, Mason-Dixon is important because it wasn't established this way, but it becomes the marker that separated the North and the South.
So I feel like I'm taking on the tone of this series on Netflix, and I sound like an idiot saying that. Um, Called Kunk on Earth.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, it's a woman who has this feigned these conversations with historians, people like you, but she asks really dumb questions and restates things, and they just stare at her. You'll love it. You need to watch it. She does, things on religion, talking to, you know, bishops and people, and they're just sort of nonplussed staring at her as she makes kind of the wrong conclusions about what they're saying or asks really daft.
Is she trying to be dumb? Is she trying to
Oh
be
yeah. Oh yeah,
offensive
no,
or
but
what?
it's completely deadpan and quite brilliant. Um, so so what
Brilliant.
you would ask in this point is, what's with the shape of Maryland? It's kind of all over the place, isn't it?
I can't speak to why Maryland is shaped the way it is. What it does do though is it creates two geographical problems that kind of manifest themselves later. First of all, is there is a divide between the northern and the southern part of the state. The state itself, when it was a colony, was basically born out of tobacco, as the entire Chesapeake area was. So Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland, all three of them had as its major crop tobacco. The other part that the geography creates as far as a dichotomy is the southern part of the state, which was a very agricultural part of the state. One of the reasons why it aligned itself philosophically with the South. And then you have the northern part of the state and the western part of the state, which is mountainous. Typically, this area aligned itself with the north. And so it's a state that has, well, it contains multitudes, as someone once famously said.
Wow.
And so Maryland becomes kind of the center of this kind of transition between the southern part of the country and the northern part of the country.
But they were on the side of the Union in the Civil War.
Well, actually, the state of Maryland had two. military units. One that aligned itself with the South. They were based out of Annapolis, I believe. Although they had representation in Baltimore, which is kind of like at the center point here, and then they also had a unit that fought on the side of the North, and so it's a bifurcated identity is seen in a bunch of different ways, and also seen in the fact that they had units that fought on both sides of the conflict.
So I'm reading here on the World
Oh
Wide
dear.
Web that Maryland contributed 60,000 troops to the Union Army and 20,000 fought for the Confederacy.
There you go.
I don't think, well, you tell me
It well,
the
it
story.
makes Baltimore kind of like a cauldron
Right,
because
right.
Baltimore became like this place where the two different identities
Hmm.
clash, and actually Lincoln has to take over Baltimore and kind of establish martial law, throws a bunch of people into jail without habeas corpus. It becomes a place that is a bit controversial legally, but then also it kind of shows the difficulty that Lincoln had in trying to keep that state in place because Virginia had already left the Union. And if Maryland had done the same, there goes Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. was basically created from borrowed land from Maryland and Virginia.
So culturally, do you consider Maryland to be in the north of the South? Now, are you a Southerner if you live in Maryland?
I would not say I was a Southerner by living in Maryland. It's interesting because one of the things I had to do in U.S. history in APUSH, in AP U.S. history, we talked about the different regions of the colonies. There was the New England colonies, there's the Mid-Atlantic colonies, and there's the Southern colonies, the Middle colonies, Southern colonies. And if you are anywhere other than Maryland, I think a lot of people just assume they put Maryland as not a middle colony, but as a Southern colony. But because geographically, culturally, and at least part wise economically, it was associated with the North, or at least the middle colonies. In every other way that you characterize those three regions, Maryland falls with the middle colonies. And so when I taught it, and I would always tell them, I said, listen, other people are going to say that Maryland is a southern colony. I teach it as a middle colony, and this is why. The middle colonies were the most religiously diverse. They were the most ethnically diverse. They were the economically speaking, Maryland was more aligned with the middle colonies, although it did have a southern portion of it. So for me, Maryland kind of fits in that category, not the South.
Well, why don't you continue your historical account? I know we're jumping very quickly forward, but
Well, yeah, but I mean, but it goes to the question about the Mason-Dixon line because I think a lot of people just associate the Mason-Dixon line with a division between the North and South. But as with most things historically, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Um, so anyway, so by the 1700s, Maryland was kind of positioned as kind of like a halfway between the northern and southern colonies. Congress actually ratifies the Treaty of Paris that ends the Revolutionary War. Part of that is being done in Annapolis, and actually, Annapolis becomes the nation's capital from 1783 until 1784. So the first capital of the United States as an independent country actually happens in Annapolis. So this is where Washington resigned his commission. He does so in the State House in Annapolis. And so Maryland's kind of positioned in this way. When they decide to kind of create a new form of government, that is done in the Annapolis Convention. So the original Constitution that we operate on in the United States was called the Articles of Confederation. It had very little power to the federal government. It had a ton of power to the state governments, hence the term Confederation. But when people decided this is not really working anymore, we need a stronger federal government, that started in the Annapolis Convention to create the idea of a new government. And then later in Philadelphia, the the uh, the government, the new government, the U.S. Constitution is established. Maryland becomes the seventh state to ratify the Constitution, and of course, it gives up some of its land to create the new capital in Washington D.C.
so what about the neighbors of Maryland? I mean, I'm looking at Delaware and how did that form separately from from Maryland?
All of those colonies have their own origin story, but they all also have a huge influence on the state of Maryland. You know, Virginia, of course, this is where tobacco was first introduced in the colonies. And so, therefore, when tobacco begins to blossom in Virginia, Maryland, especially the southern part of Maryland, it shares a climate very similar, really the same as Virginia. That's why tobacco becomes a huge component of the agriculture in the southern part of the state. As far as Baltimore and everything north of Baltimore, Pennsylvania becomes a huge influence, and Pennsylvania basically runs the entire length of that Mason-Dixon line between Maryland, with Maryland. Um, the only other state that now has a connection is West Virginia, although West Virginia does not become created until the Civil War. There has been some talk, and I kind of liken it to people talking about Eastern Oregon or Eastern Washington joining Idaho. There had been some talk, I remember some years ago, about the far western part of Maryland being more aligned culturally, politically, what have you, with West Virginia. And there was talk that the western counties of Maryland would join West Virginia. And I haven't heard much about that lately.
So
So,
what's I'm looking to the west a little bit in Maryland. What's the countryside like? I know we think about the cities, but what about when you get a little bit west on that northwestern corner? Is that
so when you go into Western Maryland, you're basically driving through rolling hills and then mountains. And so it's a very rugged territory. It's not like the Rocky Mountains. It's not that big. The Appalachians are not quite as majestic as the Rocky Mountains because the Appalachians are older. That's one of the reasons why the Appalachians are shorter because they've been the product of erosion. They're an older mountain chain. But, you know, those rolling hills, those rolling farmlands, those rolling multicolored grains that are grown in the western part of Maryland, it's a very beautiful part of the state and really a beautiful part of the country.
oh,
Not too dissimilar from West Virginia, from Western Virginia, from Western Pennsylvania. It's the same kind of geography. You're going to be driving through rolling hills. Your road is going to take large, lazy kind of turns up and down hills and mountains. It's quite something. And like other parts of the country, it does have a huge reputation with regards to the changing leaves. And so, if you were to drive through Western Maryland during the fall, you would be greeted with a veritable cornucopia of colors.
so in America the Beautiful, the line is amber waves of grain, which people just sing the words, phonetically. They don't really picture it, but is that where it came from?
I don't know if the amber waves of grain, usually when you talk about the breadbasket of the original colonies, it's Pennsylvania and New York, is what is typically discussed. And then that changes, of course, as we begin to expand westward. We do have fields of grain waving in the wind, but I think a lot of people, at least initially, were thinking about places in Pennsylvania and New York as having that quality.
So how is Maryland itself set up? And you talked a little bit about this when we were talking about Washington, D.C., but what's the relationship with from the Marylanders side and Washington, D.C.?
As far as Maryland's view of Washington,
Well,
D.C.,
I'm not just historically. Yeah.
well, historically, I mean, Maryland has been not just the giver of land, but also the provider of workers. I mean, Maryland, especially around DC, most of the people that live in places like Greenbelt and Frederick and other areas like that, many of them work in Washington, DC.
Mhm.
So why, maybe not anymore, you know, there's been some cuts,
What
but a
do you
lot
mean
of,
urban cuts? I didn't know.
yeah, I didn't know.
Now,
And
now
so,
driving out towards the amber waves of grain to set up huts. Uh, that's
no,
terrible.
I mean, as far as Maryland's always been, especially that portion of Maryland, I
Mhm.
will say it's kind of strange. You know, University of Maryland is very near Washington, D.C., and people just assume when they find out I'm from Maryland that I'm a basketball fan. But
Yeah.
there's really a disconnect between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. I mean, it's only about 40 minutes apart, but when I grew up in Baltimore, it might as well have been the moon because, when people ask me that, are you a basketball fan? Because they're thinking about the University of Maryland. I didn't know a damn thing about basketball growing up. To me, it was baseball and football. And then in the mid 70s, when the Capitals showed up, it was hockey. But, then you started kind of getting a broader sense of things. But, there was no influence of DC
Mhm.
beyond the suburbs of DC. And that does include a good chunk of Maryland, by the way. It just didn't go, it did not go so far as Baltimore.
So you talk about childhood traumas. There was a historically great team with called the Baltimore Bullets in
Baltimore Bullet.
NBA, and now I don't recall hearing Baltimore in terms of NBA because it's now the Washington Bullets. Was that another traumatic childhood experience?
Because basketball was never on my radar, and I think that's part of the reason why they moved is because maybe they weren't well supported. I don't know much about the history of the Baltimore Bullets, um, but Baltimore had always been a baseball and a football town, and I've never heard Baltimore ever characterized in basketball terms, and it could be the reason why the Bullets left. So,
No,
but I mean, go ahead.
it's just another taking away of a team from Baltimore. It seems like a pattern.
Well, we've taken it in the shorts a lot, so,
Yeah.
especially after the Revolutionary War, the British apparently not having their fill of getting their butts kicked, they came back, and one of the first places they went after was Maryland.
Why?
When you go to Maryland or when you grow up in Maryland, every school, every state has the go-to field trip locales.
Yeah.
I'm sure Oregon had it. A lot of states have it. In Maryland, the spot is Fort McHenry. So Fort McHenry sits actually on the mouth of the Potomac River as it flows into the Chesapeake Bay. It is there that is a very strategic location. When the British came in to kind of restart things because they had an issue with how the last war ended, they went after Fort McHenry. Fort McHenry, when the British bombed it, they had a prisoner on board one of their ships, a lawyer by the name of Francis Scott Key. And Francis Scott Key, upon watching the bombs bursting in air, but still noticing that the flag was still there,
Ah.
he penned the lyrics to what eventually, about 100 years later, will become the national anthem. He did it to the tune of an English drinking song. I guess that's what he had available in his head at the moment, but it works. And so, when you go to Fort McHenry today, I mean, it's a beautiful place to visit. And if you do the film before going out, they have this amazing thing that when they talk about the Star Spangled Banner being written, as the final credits roll and the song is being played, the curtains kind of open up in the room where you watch the film, and you're confronted with this gigantic wall of windows that shows the American flag flapping in the wind just outside the building.
Oh, beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And so you go to Fort McHenry, that's part of the history is the War of 1812. But as Baltimore starts to develop its own kind of thing, um, first of all, Baltimore was the first place, or Maryland was the first place where Jews were given the right to vote and to hold public office.
Oh,
There was a smattering of Jews in the early colonial period, mainly in South Carolina. But then, as the country begins to form, more starts coming in. Baltimore becomes a major avenue of entry into the United States. It wasn't just Ellis Island, it wasn't just New York, but other places were entry points as well, including the state of Baltimore, state of Maryland, rather. And so you have all these famous people that start to make their name in the 1800s. Frederick Douglass, for example, he was a slave. He was able to find freedom from slavery by disguising himself as a sailor. He gets to Havre de Grace. Havre de Grace is a little tiny town. It's in far eastern Maryland. It was once considered to be. It was once considered as a possible location of the new capital of the United States. It's a very kind of a quaint little town today, but Havre de Grace was also one of those places that people kind of gravitate towards. 1837, the Baltimore Sun starts being published. Actually, the first newspaper that began to be regularly published was from Baltimore. The first railroad comes out of the Baltimore Ohio Railroad, the B&O Railroad. There's a great museum in the city dedicated to that. We talked about the fact that Baltimore was pretty divided as far as the Civil War goes. But Maryland becomes this kind of new beacon of light, and new education is the focus. 1876, Johns Hopkins, which becomes a center point of medical research and study in the United States. That opens a little bit later. The Enoch Pratt Free Library, one of the greatest well-known libraries in the United States, established there. And as it relates to my favorite sport, Baltimore. Baltimore is all favorite state of Maryland. Baltimore is also where a young man born in the back of a bar, George Herman Ruth, better known as Babe Ruth, born in Baltimore near the present site of Camden Yards. So it's a big deal.
No, I'm learning all kinds of things here, Miller. And you mentioned all of these famous folks out of Maryland. Um, how far forward can you take it? I mean, after Babe Ruth, are there other names that come to mind?
Well, I give you names of such repute, such as um, um, Thurgood Marshall, who becomes the first black man placed upon the Supreme Court. He was born in Maryland. He was educated at Howard University, which is in DC. But he becomes a huge figure as far as the history of Baltimore. Frederick Douglass, I mentioned earlier, he's also from there. Alex Haley, the author, his ancestry comes from Maryland. I mean, you can even go as ridiculous as David Hasselhoff. He's also from Maryland. Michael Phelps, one of the greatest Olympian in the history of the Olympic Games, is from Maryland. So yeah, you can go pretty close to the modern day and still find some pretty weighty, historically relevant figures who declare Maryland as their place of birth.
I think a lot of people declare Maryland as their state, kind of like Texas. You know, people move there. One comes to mind is Billie Holiday, who actually spent would claim that, even though Billie Holiday was from Philadelphia. And so there's a lot of moving around. Is that the case? Or do people like live in, are they setting up roots and nobody leaves?
I, no, I think very much Maryland is a transitional state. If you ever look at a map of the United States and that shows the population mean, so like there's a map, there's a great map, and it shows you where the center of the population for the United States is based upon a mean average. It starts in Maryland.
Right.
But as the country has developed, that line has gone west and slightly to the south over the course of the decades. But yeah, Maryland, you know, it had a lot of significance as far as the various histories that take place there. The fact of its central location becomes a major player in why Maryland in general and Baltimore in particular becomes such a place of happenings going on. So Al Ripken's from Maryland. Yeah. So there's a lot of people that claim Maryland. You're right. And like Texas, it too has a rather iconic flag.
Mhm.
I'm sure you've seen it.
It's pretty busy. Yeah, it's got a lot of
Largely
logos.
considered one of the most beautiful flags ever uh, developed in the United States, the national flag notwithstanding.
Oh,
But it's actually the flag itself is actually the combination of two heraldic colors and banners. The first one is the Calvert, the Lord Baltimore flag. That's the black and yellow stripes. That's actually part of the flag of Baltimore. And then you see the red and the white of the Crossland banner. That was kind of an extended family member of the Calvert family, and that's those two flags, those two uh, coat of arms together make up the flag of Maryland.
you're kind of
The only
right.
bad part about the
Yeah.
flag of Maryland is that it was used as the helmet for the University of Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
stupid idea. I mean, it's a beautiful flag, but it doesn't make for a good helmet. It's just too ridiculous, and so
Yeah.
it does have its drawbacks.
Okay. Well, you've almost outlined the your next book. if you wanted. I'm proposing that you include a title of the great state of Maryland with a colon, a
With a
transitional,
colon.
yeah, and after the colon, a transitional state. And you've just made an argument about that, and it's also between the North and South. I'm just spouting off what I just learned as if I'm one of your students in class. And a lot of people in Maryland probably wouldn't like the subtitle, but it seems like that's a theme you brought back a few times.
It is a transitional place. I mean, because it sits geographically in a spot that encompasses so many different things. It can't help but be a place of transitions. I embrace it. I'll take it.
Okay. And if you think about transition, it's interesting if you draw a line from Baltimore and head directly west, you know, I don't know, 1,000 miles or something.
Are you
Probably
about to bring up Indianapolis?
you run right in. I mean, it's like on the same line. It's a straight line to Indianapolis. So it kind of makes it's a metaphor for the state of, from Baltimore to Indianapolis. It's like it was meant to be the movement west.
It's something, that's for sure. So
Well, it's stark just looking at it. I had a hypothesis and I broadened out the map and said, you could basically just walk straight across. And there you are.
you can walk straight across and go anywhere. I mean, so and that doesn't have to be Indianapolis.
Well, but I mean, just looking at the map.
And you, dear listeners, what you're hearing, if you have not heard the earlier podcast that mentioned this story, this is Hair Dr. Bourgeois jerking my chain because
Ah,
my beloved Colts left and went to Indianapolis.
they did. And how come they, I mean, that crump,
Easy.
why did they call their team the Colts? I don't think there's a lot of Colts running wild in Baltimore, or are there?
Well, you would be mistaken, my friend, because Maryland has been and traditionally has been a place for the breeding of horses, horse racing, Preakness. One of
Mhm.
the races that make up the Triple Crown is in Baltimore. And matter of fact, that's always like a big holiday is Preakness Day. And so, people go there, people hang out, party, whatever the case may be. And so, I've been known to visit the party atmosphere there with the
Really?
Preakness from time to time. Yeah, it's a thing that people do, So I
Wow.
mean, it's not my scene um, from a socioeconomic standard because those some highbrow folks with a lot of money that are breeding horses and kind of taking part in that whole thing. But it certainly is a party, and Maryland still today, when you leave Baltimore and you go north, you're going to go through mile after mile after mile of rolling hills and horse farms and places like that. And so, if you remember the episode where Mickey Rourke was driving north of Baltimore in diner, and
Yeah.
he came across that girl riding a horse. It kind of took
Beautiful.
his imagination away. And so yeah, I mean, it's a component of the state of Maryland that not many people, if you're not from there, would know anything about, as you just so eloquently showcased
Wow.
your ignorance about the lack of horses in Maryland.
Well, I stand corrected. And seeing Mickey Rourke riding a horse in Maryland was a little bit surprising. Um, but the Preakness, that's a place where triple crowns go to die, essentially, the hope of a triple crown, because you have more robust conditions probably than the rarefied Kentucky.
Now, I cannot speak with any authority about horse racing in particular, or the Preakness in particular, but I'll leave that to other people to kind of espouse upon. But
Okay.
it's got a long history and tradition there.
Well, so debunk one more of my crazy ideas.
Here we go.
Um, well, eventually a football team came back to Baltimore, and you like this team. This is actually your team. Would you say if the Ravens and the Bucks Tampa played each other, who are you rooting for?
Well, I've been a Buccaneers fan longer than I've been a Ravens fan.
So you
So
would go to Baltimore Ravens Stadium and wear the that weird orange color in front of your compatriots.
yeah, I kind of would.
Wow, it's
But
enlightening.
remember, I became a Bucks fan after the Colts left. After the Colts left, I was I was bereft
Right,
of any team to root for. I was
right.
lost.
A
I
man
was
without a
lost in a
country.
sea of misery and loneliness and rejection. And when you reach out, sometimes it's just a transitional phase. And sometimes,
There's that
it
word again.
becomes, yeah, there's that word again. It becomes a temporary fling that means nothing in the long term. But as for me, my transitional person became the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I've kind of stuck with them. So
Okay, but you didn't. You made peace with the Cleveland Browns. I mean, the Ravens moving to, becoming, going into your city.
I
Um,
didn't like how it happened, certainly. And so, because I have been the victim of such high profile, high class ownership shenanigans in
yeah,
the
it was a
past.
bad scene back there.
There's a bad scene, but I will say that Cleveland at least had the dignity of being able to keep their colors, their teams, their histories, the guarantee of a new team shortly after the Browns left the first time. And so there was a lot more consideration given to the city of Cleveland than was given to the city of Baltimore when the Colts left. And so while I don't appreciate how the Ravens got there, I do also recognize that Cleveland was given a lot more consideration than my hometown was.
So do the younger fans know that they're watching Dan Sipe and the is that
Brian
Brian
Sipe,
Sipe? Brian Sipe, right? The left-handed quarterback. That they're watching a version of the Cleveland Browns morphing into the Ravens. But is that story known today, do you think, by a lot of people?
I don't think it's talked about it as much anymore. Once the last of the Cleveland connection died out,
Yeah,
and it's been 25, 30 years now since
yeah.
the Ravens came to Baltimore.
That's a long time.
Um,
Yeah. And they won
it
a
is a long
Super
time.
Bowl.
Yeah. So, and of course, well, by the way, you know why they're called the Ravens, do you
It was
not?
on my mind because I don't think they have Ravens there.
They do. Well, first of all, they
Oh,
do have Ravens there,
all right.
but Baltimore was also the home to Edgar Allan Poe, who once quotes the Raven "Nevermore." This is where it comes from. This is why the Ravens are the mascot for the team. It comes from another great Baltimore resident, Edgar Allan Poe. So,
I think you're making that up.
no, honest, honest to God.
Okay. All right, here, Miller. I gave a little pushback and you put me in my place. What do you do?
But I mean, there's a lot about Maryland culturally that I appreciate. I appreciate that I grew up in a place that was so multicultural. I mean, much like a lot of cities on the East Coast, Baltimore was was a compilation of neighborhoods that were usually distinct based upon who lived there. I lived in a German section for a time that was not too far from an Italian section where my godparents lived. There's so many different elements to traveling through Baltimore, and it is a city of neighborhoods. I mean, some of the great cities in the world are cities of neighborhoods, but in other cities, other big cities, you could say, well, aren't all cities cities and neighborhoods? But the neighborhoods are not as defined, they're not as clarified as they are in places like Baltimore. And so it becomes a very interesting place to grow up. um, the idea of being around and growing up around so many different kinds of people, I think, has helped me. It's helped me as far as how I look at things, how I look at the world. And when I finally got a chance to get out of Baltimore and go travel, uh, albeit with the military initially,
Yeah.
um, but nevertheless, I mean, I think the transition of going from just some kid from the city in Baltimore to being somebody traveling the world, I could handle that transition better because of my time growing up in Maryland and growing up in the city of Baltimore.
Could you see yourself living there again?
Uh, it's tough because now I have to consider I'm married. I think you might know.
Oh,
Have a
well, no, you're setting up shop. I know that, but just the concept of that, does it still feel like home to some extent?
not like it used to. I think for the longest time I thought to myself I could go back. I don't think I could go back now. And so I but I don't think it's not like Texas is the end all to be all either. I mean, I could easily see myself moving somewhere else. But I think about, the state sport of Maryland, by the way, jousting. Maryland is known for having one of the largest Renaissance fairs. I remember my experiences seeing that for the first time, seeing everything that comprises uh, the Renaissance experience.
Really?
There's a particular kind of nerddom that occupies the Renaissance Fair, but it's one of the larger ones. It's just outside of Annapolis, and that was an amazing experience. Um, I think about some of the food, some of the influences from the Pennsylvania Dutch. There's one food that's particularly associated with Maryland, scrapple, which is it's a very kind of a strange mixture. I'm hoping, we've been to your hometown. We have not been to my hometown. But scrapple actually is kind of like a pork mush, for lack of a better word. It comes
Sounds
from the
great the way
Pennsylvania.
you describe it. Pork mush.
But it comes from the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Amish. It's kind of like it's a combination of fried. Well, this is not going to make anyone want to eat it, but it's a it's like a combination of like fried pork scraps. There's like cornmeal. Sometimes they use buckwheat flour. There's spices that are added to it. It comes from the Pennsylvania Dutch. It comes from the Mennonites. It comes from the Amish. It's a breakfast staple. And for all of their other sins, at the very least, the hipsters have rediscovered some old things, and Scrapple is making its way back into restaurants. Last time I took my wife there to Maryland, and she enjoyed Scrapple for the first time.
Sounds like a
Uh,
breakfast food. Like you have some scrambled eggs and scrapple. How does that sound?
that Man, you could have me there in a heartbeat if you tell me there's scrambled eggs and scrapple. So
Wow.
Jen tried it. My lovely bride who turns 50 today. Happy
You're
birthday.
putting that out
Happy
there?
birth.
Wow.
Yeah.
By
Well,
name
yeah.
and
I say
aging your
embrace it.
wife? What?
Yeah. Embrace 50.
Well, you're
What
saying that, but did you ask permission? I mean, comment like that. I give her all the congratulations. I mean, of course, but I'm surprised that
yeah.
you name her publicly and say how old she is to the world.
Oh yeah. Anyway, so my aged wife,
You're gonna
when she
cut that
when
out,
she
aren't
first
you?
no, no, no. I embrace it. She knows. She understands. She knows me. But when
Sure.
she tried Scrapple, she said, and I quote, "It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be."
A great compliment. Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of cool things about Maryland that I think a lot of people should spend a little bit more time on. So
Okay. So when and if when I should say we go there, we may explore Maryland, Maryland proper. We'll
I think what
just
you just did is colloquially referred to as a Freudian slip.
yeah, we'll be there, just like we'll be in Indianapolis, just like we'll have a elementary teacher on our podcast. We're going to do all three of those things. Damn it.
One day,
Yeah.
one day it'll happen.
Yeah. Well,
So,
good going here,
and
Miller. This was enlightening to me. So I think the listeners got a new appreciation for your great state.
I hope that they did. I hope you enjoyed yourself, everyone listening. Thank you so much for listening. Keep in mind that we are on Instagram at the Old School Podcast 2021, and we desperately would like you to like it, to share it with other people, because the purpose of the Instagram presence is to try to grow the podcast and to extend it beyond where it has been in the past. And so, if you're listening, please consider joining the podcast. Please consider joining our podcast on Instagram. Please consider sharing it with other people, liking it. It gives us some help as far as allowing the podcast to grow. So,
Absolutely.
and there you go.
All right, Miller. Well, there it is.
And there it is. And with that, we shall say adieu, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.
Wiedersehen, Herr Miller.